And here again is your host, Rhonda Vigent.
Welcome back to the Home Movie Legacy Project. We're interviewing today Linda Brown, who's making a fantastic documentary called You See Me, which includes the power of her own home movies and trying to understand her father after he passed away and the legacy of a very conflicted man. And before we went to break, Linda, we were talking about you were trying to understand, both in your first film 30 years ago, your favorite, and in this one, why your father got angry so easily. And so I think that's something a lot of us can relate to. So why don't we pick up where we left off?
Okay. His reaction to an event was often unpredictable. He seemed to overreact. So things could be going along fine, and then all of a sudden there was a little incident and it turned into a catastrophe, or he would have these huge mood swings. And as a child, it's very powerful, especially someone who I really loved and admired my father, and I spent a lot of time with him. And it was frightening that I knew that there were reasons for it, or I believed that there were reasons. And I thought that if I explored his past, which he talked about often, but there was always this cloud of not understanding what was going on. And so I thought, okay, I'm really going to look into this and pursue it. And then that's where things started to take off, when I started to explore it in this film.
And so I know for some of us, myself included, I didn't realize for years that my mother had borderline personality disorder. And because I was also a recipient of what I thought was anger that was just kind of out of the blue
Right,
and
exactly.
just very, very, condescending and very unpredictable. And so I'm just curious, I also used my home movies as sort of a vehicle to try to decide whether that behavior was prevalent when she was even a child, because we had movies that went all the way back to 1942 when she was a teenager. Did some of your discoveries come specifically from the home movies of things you saw, or conclusions you were able to draw, based on that coupled with, other types of evidence?
Watching the home movies, it was like, yes, this is the family I remembered. And then when the camera got turned off, there was a different family that I was experiencing. So I don't think that necessarily I saw evidence within the home movies, but what those movies did is confirmed, yes, your memory of things could change quickly and dramatically, or as your term came out of the blue. That is the way you experience life. And that had a great impact on the way I viewed the world, the way I navigate the world, the way I perceive the world. And that's not necessarily always a good way that one then perceives the world. There's a lot of, especially as a child, it has huge ramifications and repercussions. It leaves you always aware of like what's going to happen next. Well, could things change quickly? A kind of distrust of the natural order of the world, of, things. It's a place to be safe and to be nurtured. Exactly. So there's a lot of upheaval around those kinds of issues.
Right. So in your first film, your favorite, what was it that you were trying to accomplish personally, and how did that add to your career as a cinematographer? And then second, without this sounding like a loaded question, what is it that made you want to go back and do the second film?
I think that after I did your favorite, I didn't get the questions that I was asking. They didn't get answered. There was I was never happy with the ending. It was like I had an ending for the film, and it was time to end the film, and we were shooting on film, and it was expensive, and that was as far as I was going to be able to take it. It had an ending that I had to live with. But that always bothered me, and I felt like when I went back again, if I'm going to put all this effort into revisiting it, I'm really going to ask the hard questions. I'm going to do the work this time and not be afraid, because there's always, as you said, a risk involved in that. What am I going to discover? What am I going to find out? But this time, I guess I had enough confidence to say, I'm pretty secure in who I am. Whatever I discover is only going to help me understand myself better.
Right, right. And with that being said, so who is your target audience for the film? I know that it explores, some issues that a lot of us face, based on your trailer with, stroke and, debilitating health of our parents that are living so much longer. And then, as I figured out from your trailer, domestic abuse, perhaps.
Mm-hmm.
Who is your target audience for this film?
That's a great question because I'm learning along the way. I initially thought, okay, target audiences will be people around the issues that we've discussed: stroke, domestic violence, caregiver issues, aging parents, boomers, sandwich generation.
Right.
And at one point I was even going to use the tagline, it's a baby boomers coming of age story, thinking target audience. But actually, when I started to share the film in its final phases with colleagues and even many of my students who were really sharp critics, I found out that the students were responding to the film.
Interesting.
Very surprised. And so for marketing purposes, I know it's always wise to say to someone who has a good reaction to the film, what is it that you connected with? And immediately what I really realized is it's so much about loss, and loss in many forms, whether it's that of a loved one, a relationship, a job, a pet, our own health, that our lives are, we're always dealing with loss in some form. And how do we grieve that? How do we understand it? How do we process it? And in my case, fortunately, actually, I was able to turn it into some insightful growth for myself and my family.
Well, and that's something I'm passionate about and believe wholeheartedly. And that's why I love a film like yours that, just is evidence to the point that I write about a lot, that your home movies not only have organic physical evidence, but they can give you the biggest breakthroughs to help you shift your focus, transform your understanding, and move forward with your own life. Because we all get stuck on certain things based on the way we remember them. And then you see something in the home movies and you're like, she was always like that. It's nothing that happened because this happened 30 years later. Right. There are some fundamental things in the way that we have been since we were very young that just transcend time. And so with that, I'd like to, get a little bit more into how the home movies that you used added a dimension of authenticity to the film that might be very different than the interviews you did.
Here's a good example. Within the film, there's the iconic home movie. You've probably seen it many times at your facility when you're doing transfers, and that is the kids playing house and imitating their parents. And somebody's the mom and somebody's the dad, and they dress up in their parents' clothes. And we have those movies, and they were very cute, and I played the dad, and my younger sister played the mom. And you see us coming down the stairway with my parents' clothing on, and we're dancing, and then we're fighting, and then we make up, and then we're dancing again. Mm-hmm. And I had this footage in my first film. And in this film, the way I used it is we show that footage, and it has its kind of innocence to it. And then I start to talk about my memories of my father's anger. And then I start to interview my siblings, and then I interview my mother, thinking that she would resist this interview and just say, I don't know what you're talking about. But to my surprise, she didn't. She said, I was in a situation, I didn't have a job, I had the kids to take care of. What was I going to do? And she really laid the foundation for me to see her position and her lack. She didn't have choices. She didn't have options. And so after we talk about that, we show that same footage again, because my mother leads into it by saying it was most painful and confusing for the children because they didn't understand what was going on when they'd see us fighting. And then we re-show that same footage, and it takes on a totally different meaning. It shows that it's not just isn't this cute, funny kids imitating, but by watching and imitating what our parents have done, the way they relate to each other, the way they form relationships, the way they form their power in their relationships. And so this very same footage contextually takes on a much deeper level.
I couldn't agree with you more, and I had a similar experience when I watched my grandparents' home movies from the 40s. And that some of the roughhousing and things that I saw that were a little bit physical, which I don't know if it was just a little more generational, because I hear this a lot from people who have home movies from the 40s and 50s, but most certainly they're very telling in terms of the type of behavior that we mimic. And I often say, you know, if you really want to understand your family, how did your parents treat each other? How did your grandparents treat each other? And it will give you some huge insight moving forward in your own life. And so in wrapping this segment, Linda, we're going to talk about the important role that documentarians play in telling the stories of our lives, something that I am completely passionate about. I know you are, as a filmmaker yourself, as a teacher, and what we can really do to help move the world and move thinking forward in a very, very important way through the documentaries that independent filmmakers make, and how that may be changing. So don't go away, everybody. You're listening to the Home Movie Legacy Project.